Hello and welcome to this episode of the Zoom Room sessions as part of our Thriving Tribe project. I'm David Francis Moore and this is my colleague
Juliet.
And today we are joined by Cathy Fitzgerald. Cathy is an ecosocial arts practitioner, researcher and educator based in rural Carlow. Cathy, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Oh, it's a real honour and pleasure. Well, I'd like to start by talking about my Papiheart. As you can tell from my accent, I wasn't born in Ireland. I was born in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Papiheart means to present yourself with acknowledging your ancestors and your lands. So I'd like to thank the lands and rivers and waters that nourished me as a child. And I'm very, very happy to be in Ireland, the place of my great-grandparents. And I was very fortunate to have dual citizenship between Ireland and New Zealand. And that's a really important thing for my work, because talking about Papiheart in Aotearoa New Zealand, if you're an adult educator, you're trained to talk about your genealogy. And to me, it's becoming increasingly important to give myself a ecological direction. So when people come to know me, they know where I'm coming from and my ancestral roots. The thing too was that my grandfather on my father's side, on the Fitzgerald side, was born at sea after my great-grandparents left Tipperary. And if you're born at sea, you get citizenship from the point of origin, which was Ireland. And so I'm in between these two worlds, mediated with these great oceans. And that's why I chose the word of the Pacific goddess, Haumea, for my work, because I could have chosen something Maori or Irish, from the Irish language. And I thought, I don't know Irish or Maori that well, but what's, and Haumea is becoming more recognized. It's one of the dwarf planets. So scientists are talking about how for the first time they named a planet after an indigenous nation. And some people are saying it's also correlating with the rise of ecological consciousness, which doesn't harm my work at all. So anyway, that's a short introduction about who I am and where I've come from and my ancestral background. It depends who I'm talking to. To people who may not be familiar with the arts, I would say I'm an eco-artist. I try now to use the term ecosocial artist so that people come to an understanding that when you look at sort of ecological concerns, the social justice and the social dimensions are always connected and entangled and so forth. Sometimes I talk about being a researcher in academia as well. So I straddle these different worlds. And anybody who's doing an ecological art practice is I suppose, dabbling in multiple contexts. So I have these ecology of practices around me, a big part of the way I work would be through networking. And I seem to have a natural affinity to be able to do that online as well as in person. That came really from, I did an MA in NCAD, the National College of Art and Design in Dublin, and it was an MA in virtual realities. Now, I didn't want to do virtual realities. I was very much concerned with environmental concerns, but it gave me access to a video editing suite. But they also brought in leading educators who were using web design. So my MA project had an online survey, and I developed and built my first website using Dreamweaver and a lot of code. I'd never go and do that now, because I went down these rabbit holes of trying to become a web designer, whereas now I just use, the simplest form of WordPress to connect with people. I don't normally call myself an arts practitioner. I work, with foresters. They know that I'm in the arts, and then and I don't know. I suppose they just put the person first, really. Sometimes it's a disadvantage, I think, because contemporary art is, to many people, doesn't seem to be that relevant. It's quite elitist. Many people haven't been into art exhibition spaces. So I approach from a common, I suppose something I talk about in my ecoliteracy course if you're going to be doing this type of work, you really need skills and mutuality of thinking about the person you're talking to, about common interests and how you can progress things, do you know? So that's the one skill about eco art that I think is really under acknowledged, that you really need to develop your social skills. I say all of them. I really find that that's what it's like to be an entrepreneur in the arts. I sort of struggle with calling myself an entrepreneur, but I have a business arts mentor, and she said that's the world I'm moving into, and that's what it's like. But I think an arts background, if you're an independent sort of fine art background, you are doing that anyway to try and advance a creative career. But I did suffer, I suppose, in my fine art education. I think there may have been only about 3 or 4 lessons at the end of my 4-year degree on business. And I've asked recently, has that improved? And somebody said, no, not really. And I don't blame the colleges. They've got very tight budgets to actually try and keep the art colleges going. I know they're under severe stress, but it's really heartening that this project is perhaps addressing that oversight, because we are in unprecedented, urgent times, and we'll need creativity as never before. But we need that, you know, it's important that the artists sort of step forward. So at the moment, with the ecological emergency, the people who are speaking for us are politicians, economists. Where are our leaders and values? Who's talking about the Earth Charter? There's a lot of talk about sustainable development goals, but where are the values? And it's the arts that will help society reflect where we've gone wrong, and also be that inclusive practitioner to invite audiences to reimagine or imagine a new, better, more just and beautiful world. So I just think that's a really important time for a broadening of skills to get artists to sort of step forward and help us reflect on where society is going. And it's so timely now that with the pandemic, which is another symptom of our alienation from the living world, that the arts community get more fluent in this area, do you know? So I'm talking about my own work, of course, but be part of stepping up and helping create a civil discourse about this topic. It was very vague. I had spent 10 years in research science as a microbiologist, but as a child, through my teenage years, even when I was working, I was doing life drawing. So I had this aptitude for the arts. And when I came to Ireland, I couldn't get work in science. I arrived in the mid-90s, so there was, I think it was about 20% unemployment. So I applied to some laboratories and I couldn't get in. And then I found myself being invited to Leitrim to help an environmental project. And all of a sudden there was a reason to sort of bring my artistic skills into that project. I created a illustrated tree rare hedgerow plant calendar, and I at that time I got an ESB Environmental Endeavour Award. I think they just thought, my goodness, there's a woman in Leitrim doing the arts, trying to do something about broadleaf forests and things. So that was so encouraging. And I happened to meet friends of my family who told me about how you would get into art college here. And I thought, well, I'll do a portfolio class and put in my application, and I got accepted into 4 art colleges. And I didn't know anything about the context in Ireland. And someone said, look, you should go to NCAD if you can. And it was a big commute. I lived in Dunleary, so I was travelling in an hour each way. So I found it a very difficult transition, moving from the world of science into the arts. And even in my 3rd year, I remember thinking, I'm not doing very well. This different language that I'm encountering, how people talk about their art practice as a work, it didn't seem to relate to how I felt about working in science. And I'm more or less at the bottom of the class, but I had a very supportive tutor in my final year, and she asked me, why are you painting? You've got all these ideas about the environment. So she got me to think about installation and new media, and boom, there I just found a way of starting to put my ideas as well as some visual images out. And then I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to do a master's straight afterwards. But it took another decade to really start to establish a ecological art practice. I'd read about it at college, and I was very inspired by the pioneering eco-artists from the early 70s, Helen and Newton Harrison. They were professors, one in sculpture, one in sociology, and they had these multi-dimensional projects, real ecosocial art activity, and tremendous skills in mutuality. And I read their paper, and I still remember thinking, in the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Here was a way of connecting and developing agency in communities for environmental change. And the same thought, I thought, I don't have skills in politics. I can barely talk to people. I'm so shy. But then didn't I end up working with a local politician? And one day walking through my woods, I thought, oh my goodness, I have some of the skills now to start. And I started by doing it really quietly. I started a blog, and I started about my journey about learning about permanent forestry. And then it just spread out from there. So it has been quite a journey of faith. And I also found that this type of work, there aren't easy means to get funding in this area. So I supported myself by doing website design, administration, all these other things that I juggle. And I still do that to some extent. But now I'm starting to, I suppose, run a business, becoming an ecoliteracy tutor online for people. And last year when I was starting, I thought I'd do workshops as well. But of course, with the pandemic, everybody has gravitated to the online space. And I was very lucky in the last year to be encouraged to go to the local enterprise board and get some feasibility funding to look at delivering courses online. So it's been a real journey in the last year, incredibly busy time for me, learning business skills, a 3-day business course, start your own business course. But the one thing that's really helped me so much in the last year is business mentoring, and mentoring from a philosopher as well. So on both sides of my brain, I'm still sort of going forward. And yeah, the mentoring gives me a lot of personal encouragement and excitement for what I'm doing. So I'm really, really feeling blessed that I sort of stepped out. And it's information and insights that I developed through my research. So there was a body of work that I'm still drawing from that's propelling my work, you know. So, and the timing's right. I had people coming to my door here in rural Carlow, looking. They were in the arts. They were looking for this information, and I know because of, you know, I was on the board of NCAD. They don't have the resources to develop new curricula. So I just took a deep breath and I thought, well, I'm going to take little steps and try and develop an online course. But I first trialled it as a live workshop, and I held it in Rahana Village in South Carlow, and trialled some module material for a live day of exploration fun. And people came, there was people from Galway and Kerry and so forth. And I thought, right, I can do this and try and develop further. But it was a big gamble to try and transition that to an online space as well. I think so. I think giving business skills to anybody is essential. Like I talk about adults across the board needing a basic eco-literacy. That's fundamental. Joseph Boyce called for it decades ago. It's why we're struggling about implementing change. But equally, I would say business skills, even though it sounds like the last thing that the arts should be skilled at, I think it really empowers people working in creativity. But perhaps it's really suitable for people towards the end of their degrees, or maybe emerging artists as well, you know, because I needed to find myself in my creative work, develop the research behind me to move into a sort of a business sphere. So I think, yeah, it's a bit of a journey, and I don't know if I would have been ready to think about it earlier on, but I would see it's a real shame that so many people go through fine art degrees and they can't support themselves. You know, it's a really telling thing that so many people really struggle in the creative sector. And I think too that if there was more entrepreneurial confidence and fluency, that would help the whole sector, because I think the arts for too long have sort of, you know, got sidelined. Like you think about the Renaissance, where it was a time of great societal flourishing, and the arts and sciences were more balanced. So unfortunately, if you're trying to promote ideas through the arts, you're we're not actually sitting at the table anymore, you know. So I think having confidence in different facets of what it is to bring creative ideas forward and to get some recompense about how you might support yourself, I think are sort of very fundamental and necessary for the sector. I was encouraged to go to the local arts office, local enterprise office, and I just thought I'm not going to be supported there. I was really surprised when I went in and to the Carlow Enterprise office, and one of the employees there went through the form about how to apply for feasibility studies and grant money, and I thought, well, I'm not going to be. How do I fit myself into this process? Went through the form, and she said to me, Cathy, you're a woman in business. Everybody's talking about the environment. Big tick on that box. Everybody's starting to talk in business about being online, tick. And then she said, and you know, have you researched your business idea? And I said, oh no, not really. She said, you've just done a PhD. So it was like, oh, so it was so great to get that. And then the thing that I found was in my application for a feasibility study to support my sort of fledgling business, what's helped me so much to actually even maybe embrace this new identity is having business mentoring. And I'm very fortunate to have somebody, Mary Carter, who's an ex-arts officer, but she's a leading women in tech speaker. And she's got a very strong acumen for business strategy, marketing, and so forth. So she's constantly in contact, so keeping an eye on me, but also sort of showing me sort of a map of where I should be heading with my business. And some of it frightens me, just taking little steps by little steps, you know. But it's funny, over a year, I've actually done quite a lot of the things she recommended, and some of them are just like publicity and so forth. I thought this, one of the people said to me, you know, maybe ring up a radio station and get an interview about your business. And I thought, I can't see myself doing that. But then they came knocking. So it was just like being alerted to ways of promoting my practice and my work. So that's been really, really useful. And then the other thing that I also got mentoring from a Canadian online company called Miracy. I'm not sure if people have heard of Danny Inney. He's a Canadian entrepreneur and educator for the online arena. Has written books like Teach Your Gift and so forth. So it was fascinating to be privy to a course, which is the Course Builders Laboratory, and get a whole suite of online modules about how to survive and develop an online business. So it's not just, you know, turning your computer on and starting a Zoom place. I had to learn how to become an educator as well as an online marketer as well. So that's been incredibly useful to have that body of experience that I can refer to, and then having someone in the Irish context, and also someone who's a woman too in business. I think there's real challenges, and I think that has to be so supported at the moment as well. Well, from my master's, and that I seem to have developed an aptitude for being online, I was really put into an interesting position. In 2007, I became the inaugural director for the Art Links program. At that time, this was pre the global financial crash, so it was quite a well-funded and innovative program across 5 counties. And I worked with a developer, a web developer, to create a website. And at the end of my 3-year tenure, there was 1,300 creative practitioners on the directory. They had uploaded the information, links to their websites. I still feel so sad that that wasn't continued. But it showed that creative people really wanted an online presence. During that position, I had to write to the entire arts community in the Southeast every month on a constant contact e-newsletter. So I have developed a confidence about, and I suppose etiquette about being online. I find that I'm quite comfortable. Even like, I suppose my biggest fear in presenting an online course was to put myself in front of the camera for these Zoom meetings and actually, I suppose, host and hold a meeting. I still get quite nervous about it, but my goodness, I enjoy it so much. It's been so rewarding to see people take my ideas and reinterpret them for their own situation. So no, I'm still active on social media. Facebook, I suppose, would have been initially very useful. I tend now to, with my course participants, use Slack a lot so that we can keep on top of specific topics. So that's become quite useful. And I suppose, getting into the business sphere, I'm trying to work up my skills in LinkedIn. So that's another arena. I just, in the last week, made a LinkedIn page for my business. I actually didn't realise that you could do a sort of a professional page about your business. So I'm constantly trying to keep up to date. That's the so I would use, I'm very inspired by another leading woman in business in Carlow, Nicola Brown. She came to one of my first courses in 2007 on blogging your creative practice, and she is phenomenal. In that first month, Ken Maguire, who now is a broadcaster for KCLR, his degree was in social media. He got a first, so I got him in to teach Art Links courses on podcasting and blogging. And my friend Nicola took every ounce of information he had, and within the first month of her blogging about felting and so forth, she had 3,000 visitors to her website. And in turn, she's kept going. She's on Facebook constantly. She's got an international following. So she developed that much confidence that she gave workshops overseas. With the lockdown, she's going back and developing further her online courses, and she's been doing that for about 5 years. And she was the person personally who said to me, Cathy, I think you'd be great online too. And I said, my goodness, but my topic, just, what would people have never heard of the word ecoliteracy, and they don't really sense the concerns I have about the environment and the connection between the arts. And she said, Cathy, you've got such a big following already. I don't think that would be a problem. And I think I'm also hitting the groundswell of a growing public awareness from Greta Thunberg standing up, speaking truth to power, Extinction Rebellion. And yeah, it's been a groundswell that I've just, I suppose, I'm tapping into now. And I think too, how can you avoid it as a human being at the moment about the intersectional sort of ecological injustices, racism, so forth that are going on. And unless you have a grounding in ecological sort of literacy, it's hard to see how you might respond in a really deep way through your creative practice. So I'm excited. I'm really excited about my work, but daunted about where it might go, because there's part of me that would like to see my course widely available. But there's something about my course, David, that I'm working, I have a co-host, a philosopher who's actually mentoring me as well. And we've found that in our courses, we keep our course numbers to the maximum of 20. Say on a weekly, excuse me, on a weekly meeting, we would maybe have 12 to 15 people turn up on the Zoom meetings. And there's something about when artists come together that they don't want to be part of a big crowd. So the really intimate discussions come up in these Zoom meetings, but it wouldn't work if it was bigger. So I'm in this strange situation where I know other educators are really disheartened about Zoom and teaching online, but I'm in the fortunate position where I'm catering to a small audience, and it's working really well. And it reminds me of perhaps a sort of a virtual artist salon. There's that, like, it doesn't sound like it would be achievable, but over 6 weeks, we really get to know each other, and there's space for our work. I run my sessions for an hour, then I give people a break from the screen for 5 minutes, and those that want to go deeper with the content, with myself and my philosopher, contact Dr. Nicola Brown. He's in California. It's been a real eye-opener that we can learn together and share together, you know. So I just put in my blog this morning an unexpected review from an Irish-born artist who's been settled in Beijing for the last 10 years. And she is absolutely thrilled to be connected through this shared course with people not only in Ireland but across the world, because that's what's happened, David. I wasn't expecting it, but I sort of thought it might happen. But I've got people from Europe, from the United States, from New Zealand contacting me to be part of this learning, do you know? So that's another thing I think the Enterprise Office is quite interested in for my particular work, that already, my mentor's already said this. She said, I can see this going global. And I'm just going, oh, I just want to keep it, you know, small. And there's part of me, I don't want to just capitalize on it and make it some big, massive open online course. So it's negotiating that, and then maybe in time having a dialogue with art colleges as well. And there could be the start of something in Aotearoa New Zealand. Like, they're starting to think quite deeply about the inadequacy of their arts degrees to sustain people in a working profession where they've even got enough food to eat, you know, and thinking about what are the topics that are really relevant to young people now. So I'm really pleased, and it's you know, you don't know me personally, but my PhD was such a struggle because I was crossing disciplines, and there were many years I wondered if it was worth it, but I'm so delighted that it took the time to reinvest in my practice and go deeper, and then come out and be open and supported just by unexpected occurrences by people who are in business. Because sometimes I suppose the normal pathway after academia would be to publish a monograph. So, but I'd already published an ebook as evidence for my creative-led practice, and a whopping big thesis that, I just didn't want to go back and writing another book. I wanted to actually empower people in the art sector. Huge, and as far as going into business, I think collaboration is just so fundamental. I've mentioned my business mentor, Mary County. I was very fortunate when I was submitting my PhD to come in contact with Dr. Nicola Brown. He's a philosopher, and he was finishing his PhD. And if I thought it was hard to talk about an ecological art practice, if you're an eco-minded philosopher, they have no audience. They have no visibility. You know? So anyway, he was on LinkedIn and he said, look, I'm going to try and offer people philosophy mentoring, and they call it coaching in the States. And I said, oh my goodness, I would so love that. So I was probably one of his first mentees. And I was actually sort of developing my online course business. And because he's taught for 10 years in academia, he was the perfect resource and complement to me. So he helped me deal with the nerves about teaching online. I haven't got teaching experience. And he's now just this week launched his first course on my platform. And so he's dealing with all the tech and, you know, emails not turning up to the participant, you know, all these type of learning hurdles that you go through when you first start to teach online. You know, it's not so much about the content, but managing everybody's experience. So I really, really treasure that. And he's in California, we've never met. So that I suppose level of, well, it shows that ecological insights are a bit thin on the ground, but with technology, we can come together in sort of innovative ways. And from the testimonials that we've been receiving, it's really helping people. So I wouldn't be continuing if it wasn't, you know. So yeah, and the other person I should thank as well is my husband, Martin, because of the my fears and nerves about the Zoom. Martin would be on another computer in another room, and he would be letting people into the Zoom, telling me people would be sending me chat messages. Like, I'd be so nervous that I couldn't really cope with it. And he'd also be controlling our dogs as well. You know, that would be barking. So all these sort of practical things about, you know, presenting yourself online. And I also, because I'm in in a rural area in South Carlow, we've got a fantastic broadband service here, Aptus, who we've had for years. But when I started filming myself online during the lockdown with the internet traffic, I was using a program called Loom, where you would, if you're presenting PowerPoints, it would put yourself in a little small circle to talk over and make your PowerPoint material more engaging. But because of the broadband speed, my voice wasn't matching my lips and so forth. But I left it because the students actually wanted to see me. They wanted that. So there are constraints at the moment about how professional and slick that I could make my videos, but that doesn't really seem to matter. I had feedback that people felt like I was welcoming them into my home with Martin, and Martin's also got a developed sculpture practice, you know, so, and he was able to talk about his ecological ethos that guides his work. So it has been a real collaborative effort on many levels. And the other thing too, I'm starting to find that people are really inspired by my doing interviews with other practitioners, both in Ireland and across the world. So I bring those interviews into the course. So it's still growing and developing in numerous ways. Value my time. I probably undervalue it. Yeah, and I have great difficulty in costing my time. Yes, funny, I just applied for a research grant from the European Cultural Foundation. They have opened a call. I mean, the second time I've applied, and the success rate is only about 1%. But I struggled to find ways to support this type of endeavour. And they were looking for cultural projects that would be suitable post-pandemic to connect relationships between European creative practitioners. So, yeah, and when I went through the budget of trying to price myself, my business mentor said, look, you're suffering from what a lot of creative people do. You don't put a value on your time. You're so eager to get the work out there, you're forgetting to pay yourself, do you know? So I still struggle with that, even if I was asked to develop policy or things like that. Yeah, and I think too, being a woman, where you're doing a lot of stuff in society that's more like caring and looking after things, we don't value that so easily, you know. So I suppose that's where I find the idea of women in business really powerful. And if there was to be a model to develop in Ireland, I think that's an important aspect. And of course too, when you think about how many women go through art college, do you know, it's a huge, there's a great number of women who go through that learning, do you know. So, and I think organisations like the Enterprise Office and Enterprise Ireland, they've got these women in business networks, and I do tell other women to join them. And who are in the arts or in crafts, and they look at me a little bit like, I don't know if that's really for me, but that's what I thought as well, do you know? In physical space, I'm just working in a converted bedroom, which is, I haven't, my trusty workhorse is a 12-year-old iMac, so I'm constant fear that that's going to fall over with the work I'm doing at the moment. Physical spaces for my creative practice, I had long thought that it sort of had misgivings about the career path in fine art that sort of suggests that you develop your creative profile by doing short-term residencies, and that really jarred against my feeling that we don't have deep relationships to our places. So talking about developing my ecosocial art practice, I realised that I'm living on a piece of land that's got a monoculture forest planted on it, and here was the perfect opportunity to try and transform it into an ecological permanent forest. And that led me on a journey to work with leading Irish foresters and so forth. So that's, I'm looking at my forest now, do you know, so it grounds me. It's also a space that revives me when I'm spending too much time on the computer as well. But I am also surprised how the virtual space works in my practice now. It was, yeah, I've been blogging since 2008 when I first started to transform the forest, and I've been, that's what happened, David, too, that an eco-philosopher in Australia, Dr. Glenn Albert, talked about if you make a commitment to your place, over time you'll start to really stand up and fight for it. And I thought, I can't see that. I'm fairly shy in public, but no, I did. I've done it twice. I stood up to bring this type of forestry ideas into Green Party policy. 2020, it's now the Dublin Mountains are going to be converted into this continuous cover permanent forestry. So I was part of a group, of course, again, just wasn't me doing that, but I became the spokesperson for that during my PhD. And then I also, in another point, which is coming into play now, I was called up by the Irish Times yesterday. I stood up for the international developing law against the crime of ecocide, which is the destruction of ecosystems. And in the last 2 weeks, President Macron in France convened the outcome of, I think it was an 18-month Citizens' Assembly in France on climate. Top of their agenda, 99 unanimous % support for an international law against the crime of ecocide. And I presented that at the Green Party convention in 2013 because I fell in love with my forest and I didn't want it to be damaged. And I thought, how can I do this? I knew some ecological artists had put copyrights on their land art practices, and I thought, well, I talked to some lawyers about that, and they said, no, when you die, Cathy, you can't actually protect your forest in the future. And so one of my blog followers told me about the late environmental lawyer Polly Higgins, who spearheaded this international campaign for this law of ecocide. So she passed away last year, but with the rise of, just before she passed away, she worked with Greta Thunberg in Extinction Rebellion. So now the Pope has endorsed it. You've got France talking about it. The two nations that put it first on the table for the International Criminal Court were island nations, so at risk of a rising sea level and ocean acidification. And back in 2013, I thought in solidarity of those nations, Ireland would be in a great position to also endorse this law. So I suppose that's what I was trying to convey to the Irish Times journalist yesterday. So, and I would stress that in the upcoming Citizens' Assembly, it hasn't been confirmed yet, but there is talk of one on biodiversity and land use. I'm saying the ecocide law should be a high priority to be explored in that process. So, and once people hear about it and understand what it means, it's not just another national environmental law. Mm-hmm. This is something, the overarching framework of building a new relationship care for the whole of the planet, you know. I hope it would be for all beings, you know, human and non-human. Suppose getting some funding from the local enterprise board to do the online course, the Course Builders Laboratory in Canada at a distance, was way beyond my means. So the feasibility grant covered a good percentage of that, and that has undoubtedly helped me gain confidence both in marketing, content, how to be an educator online. I suppose there's been small things to keeping up to date with how to manage social media. I use programs like Tailwind. I actually find I'm almost at the point where I wish somebody else was doing the marketing side, because I'm getting so interested in the teaching side. So I suppose that's how a business grows. You find, oh, hang on, I can't do everything, you know. So maybe in a year or so, maybe I could share that work with somebody else, you know. And I suppose that's what the enterprise board is interested in, how your work might actually give employment to somebody else too. I would think it needs to be more than, I think it needs to be part of the curricula, and I think art-minded entrepreneurs should be brought in to teach those courses. Somehow I was looking at the program here, I don't think there is that skillfulness in the arts sector to be teaching about entrepreneurship in the way that some business people would have a lot of experience, you know. So probably there needs to be more discussion about bringing in entrepreneurs into that space. And I think it needs to be more than academic. I think it needs to be people who are really in the cut and thrust of running a business or being mentors in the business sector. So, you know, I wish you very much all the best in that respect, because I think it's really, really important.
This has been the Zoom Room Sessions, and this has been Cathy Fitzgerald. Cathy, if people want to find out more about your work and what you do, what is your website and what is your social media handles?
The best way for people to find about my work is at Haumea, HAUMEA.ie, or they can just put in cathyfitzgerald.ie and you'll find all my projects.
Brilliant, and thank you so much for joining us on the show today.